Dustin Mallory dragged himself through the busy corridors of Crestwood Academy, his scuffed boots echoing on the slick tile floors. Just 15, he stood barely 5'4" and looked like a twig, his hand-me-down clothes swimming on his little frame. Heavy shadows darkened his eyes from the late-night hours he put in cleaning at the local diner to help his widowed grandmother pay bills. His blonde hair was forever a mess, and he kept his gaze low to keep away from the stares and cruel jokes that followed him everywhere he went. The other kids at Crestwood came from well-off families, driving cars that cost more than Dustin's grandmother made in a whole year. Their fancy jackets, new tablets, and easy talk about weekend trips to the lake served as constant reminders that he didn't fit into their world. He was the charity student, the foster kid who'd arrived from the wrong side of town when his previous guardian got sick. Dustin tightened his grip on his beat-up book bag as he moved toward his cubby, trying to disappear among the groups of loud teenagers. In his pocket, 7 worn dollar bills represented his whole lunch budget for the week, money his grandmother had saved by sewing clothes and missing her medicine. He'd learned to make those $7 last, buying only the plainest snacks from the school vending machines and saving them carefully. "Hey there, look what we have here." The voice made Dustin freeze in place. Kyle Bennett rose up from behind a line of lockers like a lion ready to pounce. At 16, Kyle was everything Dustin wasn't. Tall, broad, and filled with the kind of easy assurance that came from never having to worry about funds. His dad owned 2 construction firms in town, and Kyle made sure everyone knew it. Name brand gear, the latest gaming system, and a shiny new pickup truck in the parking lot showed his status to anyone who cared to see. Behind Kyle stood his usual buddies: Bruce Nelson, thick like a wrestler with hands the size of shovels, and Cody Shaw, smaller but nasty, with hard eyes that seemed to enjoy other people's suffering. They called themselves the Royal Court, though Dustin secretly thought of them as hyenas circling weak animals. "Going to lesson, scholarship kid?" Kyle's voice held that taunting tone that made Dustin's stomach drop with fear. "Remember to bring your food money today. The Kyle Bennett Help Fund is always taking donations." Dustin tried to walk around them, but Bruce moved to block him. The hallway suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in from all sides as other students rushed past, their eyes turned away. Everyone at Crestwood Academy knew the unspoken rule: you didn't get involved with Kyle Bennett's business unless you wanted to become his next victim. "I don't have any funds," Dustin said softly, which was technically right. The $7 in his pocket was already meant for lunch, and giving it up would mean going hungry until later. Kyle's laugh was sharp and cold. "Everyone has funds, scholarship kid. It's just a matter of what you care about. Now I'm going to ask you nicely one more time." He held out his hand, palm up, his fancy bracelet catching the light. "Help the fund. $7 should do it." Dustin felt his face burn with shame and anger, but he kept his voice even. "I need that money for food." "Food," Cody snickered. "What are you going to buy with $7? A bag of chips and a drink? Come on, man, live a little. Give to a good cause." "The good cause being Kyle's weekend fun fund," Bruce added, cracking his knuckles loudly. Dustin could feel dozens of eyes on him now, students pretending to fix their cubbies while really watching the drama play out. Phones were already coming out, ready to record whatever happened next. At Crestwood Academy, embarrassment was currency, and Kyle was about to make a big withdrawal from Dustin's pride. "Please," Dustin said, hating how desperate he sounded. "I'll pay you back later. I just need—" "You'll pay me back?" Kyle's voice rose with fake shock. "You'll pay me back with what? Your grandmother's savings from sewing clothes?" The diner comment hit like a real punch. Dustin did indeed work as a cleaner for several local places, scrubbing their floors and washing their dishes for just above minimum wage. It was honest work, worthy work, but Kyle made it sound bad and shameful. "Don't talk about my grandmother," Dustin said softly, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Kyle leaned in closer, close enough that Dustin could smell his strong cologne and see the cruel joy in his eyes. "Oh, did I touch a nerve? What's she gonna do? Come here and sew my clothes in my defense?" Something snapped inside Dustin's chest, a carefully held barrier that had been holding back years of training and habit. For just a moment, his body shifted without thinking into a fighting stance. Weight balanced on the balls of his feet, hands loose and ready, chin tucked slightly. It was muscle memory from countless hours in the shed, from a life that felt like a forgotten dream. But then reality came crashing back. This wasn't the dojo at Iron Fist Martial Arts, where his uncle had trained him since he was 7 years old. This wasn't the place where Michael Lee, former karate champion, had taught his nephew every move, every block, every hard-earned lesson about focus and control. That world had vanished 5 years ago when his uncle moved to another town. After his uncle left, everything had changed. The dojo closed when they couldn't pay the rent. His grandmother took whatever job she could find, and Dustin made a promise to himself and to his uncle's memory. He would never use his skills outside the dojo. Violence had taken his uncle away from him in that way, and he wouldn't let it destroy him too. Dustin forced himself to relax, to step back down from the edge of violence. "Just leave me alone," he muttered, reaching into his pocket for the worn bills. "That's better," Kyle said with joy, watching as Dustin's fingers closed around the funds. "See how easy that was? Why do we have to do this every time?" Every time. That was the issue. This wasn't the first time Kyle had demanded his food money, and it wouldn't be the last. It had started small, $1 here, 50 cents there, always with the excuse that it was some kind of joke or harmless custom. But as Dustin's silent resistance made it clear he wouldn't fight back, the demands had increased. "I don't have $7, Dustin said, pulling out 5 wrinkled singles. "This is all I have." Kyle's face darkened. "That's not going to work for me, scholarship kid. $7 was the price. If you can't pay the full amount, maybe we need to talk about other ways to pay." Dustin looked at the $5 in his hand, knowing it meant less than half his food budget for the week. Giving it up meant going hungry, but refusing might mean something much worse. $7, Kyle repeated, his voice taking on an edge that made nearby students step further away. "Or maybe we need to have a more serious talk about your place in this school." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Dustin could feel the weight of every stare, every phone camera pointed in his direction, every whispered comment that would follow him through the corridors for weeks to come. His uncle's voice echoed in his memory. "In the dojo, you fight with honor. Outside the dojo, you walk away with dignity." But where was the dignity in this? Where was the honor in being systematically made fun of while everyone watched and did nothing? Dustin handed over the $5, his face burning with shame. "That's all I have," he repeated. Kyle pocketed the funds with fake joy. "Well then, I guess we'll have to call this a down payment. You can bring me the other $2 tomorrow plus interest. Let's say $4 total for the trouble." "That's not fair," Dustin said softly. "Fair?" Kyle's laugh was sharp and cruel. "You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that you get to attend this school on scholarship while students who really belong here have to compete for spots? Is it fair that you take up space that could go to someone whose family really gives to this community?" Bruce and Cody nodded along like loyal followers, though Dustin guessed they were just as uncomfortable with Kyle's cruelty as everyone else. They'd learned, like most people, that it was easier to go along with Kyle Bennett than to stand up to him. "I earned my place here," Dustin said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Earned it?" Kyle's voice dripped with fake surprise. "With what? Your sad story about your foster care and your cleaning job? Please, you're here because some soft administrator decided this school needed more foster kids, and you were the best charity case they could find." The words hit like real blows, each one carefully picked to cause maximum damage. Dustin felt tears welling up behind his eyes, but he refused to give Kyle the joy of seeing him cry. Instead, he turned and started walking away, leaving behind the laughter and whispers that followed him like a toxic cloud. He made it to the bathroom before the emotions overwhelmed him. Locking himself in a stall, Dustin let the frustration and embarrassment wash over him. In his mind, he could see his uncle's face, could hear Michael Lee's voice explaining the sweet skill of karate. "Every fighter has a choice," his uncle had said during one of their last training sessions. "You can fight with anger, or you can fight with purpose. Anger makes you sloppy, makes you foolish. Purpose makes you exact, makes you strong." But what was the purpose in this situation? What was the point of having skills if you couldn't use them when you needed them most? Dustin knew he could drop Kyle Bennett with a single clean move. Years of training had given him hand speed and power that would shock anyone who judged him by his size. He'd sparred with grown men, competed in amateur matches, held his own against fighters who outweighed him by 50 pounds. But none of that mattered outside the dojo. Outside the dojo, violence only led to more violence, and Dustin couldn't afford to get suspended or kicked out. His scholarship depended on keeping good grades and staying out of trouble. One fight, one moment of lost control, and he'd lose everything his family had worked for. The bullying continued to increase over the following weeks. Kyle seemed to take Dustin's silence as permission to push harder, to demand more, to cause greater embarrassments. The daily food money theft became just one part of a system of cruelty meant to break Dustin's spirit. Accidental shoulder bumps in the hallway became common, always timed when teachers weren't watching. Dustin's cubby was ruined with spray-painted words like charity and foster, the cleaning crew washing it off, but never fast enough to prevent dozens of students from seeing it. His book bag was accidentally knocked from his hands, spilling his books and papers across the floor, while Kyle and his friends watched with amusement. But it was the mental abuse that hurt the most. Kyle had a talent for finding Dustin's weakest spots and pressing on them with perfect skill. Comments about his foster care, his grandmother's job, his hand-me-down clothes, and his scholarship status became a daily background of embarrassment. "Hey, scholarship kid," Kyle would call out in the cafeteria, loud enough for half the school to hear. "How's your grandmother enjoying her new job? I heard the Smiths fired her for stealing. Is that where you get your food money now?" The lies were almost worse than the truth. Dustin's grandmother had never been fired, had never stolen anything, but the rumors spread through the school like wildfire. Students who had previously ignored him now looked at him with suspicion or pity. Teachers who had seemed helpful became more distant, as if they were questioning whether he really belonged at Crestwood Academy. 4 weeks into the school year, Dustin had lost 15 pounds from missing meals to pay Kyle's daily tax. His grades were starting to slip as he spent more time working extra hours at the diner to make up for the lost funds. Heavy shadows under his eyes had deepened, and his clothes hung even more loosely on his shrinking frame. His grandmother noticed, of course. Beverly Mallory wasn't the kind of woman who missed details, especially when it came to her only grandson. "Honey, you're not eating enough," she said one evening, as they sat at their small kitchen table, sharing a dinner of soup and bread that she'd stretched to last 2 meals. "Are you having issues at school?" Dustin looked at his grandmother's worried face, seeing the tiredness lines that came from working 18-hour days to keep them afloat. She was already carrying so much weight, so much duty. How could he add his problems to her burden? "I'm fine, Grandma," he lied, "just busy with schoolwork." Beverly studied his face with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read people's true intentions through years of cleaning their most private spaces. "Dustin, you know you can tell me anything, right? If someone is giving you trouble—" "I said I'm fine," Dustin repeated, his voice sharper than he'd meant. The hurt that flashed across his grandmother's face made him immediately regret his tone, but the damage was done. That night, Lying in bed and listening to his grandmother's tired breathing through the thin walls of their apartment, Dustin stared at the framed photo on his nightstand. It showed him and his uncle at the dojo, both of them grinning and holding up karate belts after Dustin had won his first amateur match. He'd been 12 then, already showing real skill in the dojo. "You've got true skill, kid," his uncle had said that day. "But skill without focus is just wasted potential. The dojo will teach you about yourself, about what you're made of when everything else is stripped away." Dustin knew what he was made of. He'd proven it dozens of times in approved matches against fighters who came at him with everything they had. But those fights had rules, judges, safety gear. They had honor and respect, even in defeat. What Kyle was doing wasn't fighting. It was a system of cruelty, meant to break him down piece by piece until there was nothing left but silence and fear. And the worst part was that Dustin's refusal to defend himself was only making it worse. The breaking point came on a Wednesday morning in November. Dustin arrived at school to find his cubby ruined again, but this time the damage was worse. Someone had broken the lock and dumped the contents all over the hallway floor. His textbooks were scattered and torn, his notebooks soaked with what smelled like soda, and his only photo of his uncle, the one he kept taped inside his cubby door, was crumpled and stepped on. Students walked past the mess, some laughing, others looking uncomfortable but unwilling to help. Dustin knelt in the hallway, trying to save what he could, his hands shaking as he carefully smoothed out the damaged photograph. "Oops," came Kyle's voice from behind him. "Looks like someone had an issue with their cubby. That's too bad." Dustin didn't turn around. He couldn't trust himself to look at Kyle's smirking face without doing something he'd regret. Instead, he continued gathering his ruined belongings, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. "You know," Kyle continued, his voice taking on that familiar mocking tone, "maybe this wouldn't happen if you paid your fees on time. The help fund exists for a reason. Leave him alone." The voice came from somewhere behind Kyle, soft but clear. Dustin looked up to see Olivia Stone standing near her cubby with a stack of books in her arms. She was one of the quiet kids too, but unlike Dustin, she seemed to disappear into the background by choice rather than chance. She was pretty in a simple way, with blonde hair and smart eyes that usually stayed focused on her lessons. Kyle's attention shifted to her, like a lion scenting new prey. "Well, well. Looks like Scholarship Kid has a girlfriend. How cute." Olivia's cheeks flushed, but she didn't back down. "I said leave him alone. He hasn't done anything to you." "Hasn't done anything." Kyle's voice rose with fake shock. "He's taking up space that belongs to real students. He's here on charity, stealing chances from kids who really deserve them." Bruce and Cody had moved to stand beside Olivia now, forming their usual triangle of fear. Dustin felt his chest tighten with a familiar rage, the same feeling he'd gotten in the dojo when an opponent threw a cheap move or fought dirty. "Just ignore them," Olivia whispered to Dustin. "They're not worth it." But they were worth it. Not because of what they were doing to him. Dustin had learned to take that kind of beating. They were worth it because now they were threatening Olivia, someone whose only crime was showing him a moment of basic human kindness. "You know what I think?" Kyle said, his voice carrying that edge that meant real trouble was coming. "I think our little charity case here has been hiding something from us. I think he's got more funds than he lets on." He pointed to Bruce, who grabbed Dustin's book bag and dumped its contents across the floor. Dustin's work clothes tumbled out, along with his worn textbooks, a half-eaten snack bar he'd been saving for lunch, and his wallet. Kyle snatched up the wallet and opened it, finding the $30 bill Dustin had been saving for his grandmother's upcoming birthday. "Well, well," Kyle said with fake surprise. "What do we have here? Looks like Scholarship Kid has been lying to us." "That's not mine to give," Dustin said softly, his voice even despite the rage building in his chest. "It's for my grandmother's birthday." Kyle held the 30 up to the light as if checking for fakes. "Your grandmother's birthday? How sweet. But see, you owe me quite a bit of back payments plus interest. I think this just about covers it. Give it back, Dustin said, standing slowly. Something in his voice made Kyle pause. For just a moment, doubt flickered across the bully's face. Dustin was standing differently now, his weight balanced on the balls of his feet, his hands loose at his sides. Everything about his posture screamed danger to anyone who knew how to read the signs, but Kyle Bennett wasn't one of those people. "Or what?" he said, pocketing the 30. "You gonna do something about it, scholarship kid? You gonna finally grow a spine?" Dustin looked at him for a long moment, seeing not just Kyle, but every bully who'd ever used their size or status to hurt someone weaker. He thought about his uncle, about the promise he'd made, about the violence that had torn his family apart when his uncle moved away 5 years ago. Then he thought about Olivia, about her bravery in speaking up when no one else would. He thought about his grandmother, working 18-hour days and still finding ways to smile. He thought about that $30 bill earned through hours of cleaning floors and stocking shelves, meant to buy the only gift he could afford for the woman who'd sacrificed everything for him. Sometimes, Dustin realized, keeping one promise meant breaking another. "Yeah," he said softly, his voice carrying a new edge that made several nearby students stop and stare. "I think I am." Kyle threw the first punch, a wild right hand that telegraphed itself from 3 feet away. In the old days, before the promise, before the guilt, Dustin would have slipped it easily and countered with perfect skill. This time was no different. Dustin moved like water, slipping Kyle's punch by inches and coming back with a textbook-perfect palm strike that caught the bigger boy right on the jaw. Kyle's eyes rolled back and he dropped like a stone, his fancy boots echoing against the polished floor. The hallway erupted in shocked silence. Bruce rushed forward, his massive frame moving with surprising speed, but Dustin was already in motion. 5 years of dojo rust fell away like an old coat as muscle memory took over. He ducked under Bruce's wild swing and drove a precise knee into the bigger boy's stomach, folding him in half. Cody tried to grab Dustin from behind, but Dustin had heard his footsteps. A fighter learns to use all his senses. He spun, breaking Cody's grip with a move his uncle had taught him thousands of times, and followed up with a clean side kick that sent Cody stumbling backward into a row of cubbies. The entire fight had lasted less than 40 seconds. 3 bigger, stronger opponents lay on the ground, groaning and struggling to catch their breath, while Dustin stood over them, barely breathing hard. The crowd of students that had gathered was silent, their phones out and recording, trying to understand what they'd just seen. "Here's how this works," Dustin said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline rushing through him. He looked down at Kyle, who was struggling to sit up with blood trickling from his nose. "You're going to give me back my funds, all of it, every dollar you've taken from me over the past month." Kyle wiped blood from his nose with a shaking hand. "This isn't over." Dustin crouched down so he was eye level with the fallen bully. "Yes, it is. Because if you ever touch me again, if you ever demand funds from anyone else, if you ever make someone feel small just because you can, I'll be there. And next time, I won't hold back." He stood and offered his hand to Olivia, helping her gather her scattered books while ignoring the phones that were still recording and the growing crowd of students who couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. The quiet scholarship kid, the easy target, the charity case had just taken down 3 bigger opponents with perfect skill. Kyle struggled to his feet, his name-brand clothes wrinkled and his ego bruised worse than his face. "You think this makes you strong? You think this changes anything?" Dustin turned back to face him, and for the first time in months, his voice carried real authority. "I think it changes everything. The question is whether you're smart enough to figure that out." Principal Thompson arrived within minutes, summoned by the noise and the flood of social media posts that were already spreading through the school. Dustin expected suspension, expulsion, maybe even legal charges. Instead, he found himself sitting in the principal's office, listening to a parade of student accounts about Kyle's system of bullying. "It seems," Principal Thompson said carefully, studying the accounts piled on his desk, "that this event was the result of ongoing bullying that our staff failed to deal with properly." He looked at Dustin with something that might have been respect. "While I cannot officially allow fighting, I understand that sometimes people are pushed beyond reasonable limits." Kyle, sporting a bandaged nose and a severely bruised ego, sat in the corner with his parents. His dad, a well-known businessman who'd given a lot to the school's sports programs, was red-faced with shame. His mom kept shooting worried glances at Dustin as if she couldn't quite believe her son had been bested by someone half his size. "There will be punishments for everyone involved," the principal continued. "But given the events and the accounts we've received, I think in-school suspension would be right rather than expulsion." Dustin nodded, accepting the punishment. It was fair, even easy considering what could have happened, but more importantly, it sent a message to every other bully in the school. Actions have results, and sometimes the quiet kids aren't as helpless as they seem. The video of the fight went viral within hours, spreading far beyond the walls of Crestwood Academy. Students who had never spoken to Dustin before came up to him in the corridors, some to congratulate him, others to share their own stories of being bullied. Teachers who had previously ignored him began including him in class discussions, treating him with new respect. But the biggest change was in Dustin himself. He walked straighter now, spoke with more confidence, and no longer felt the need to disappear. He wasn't looking for fights, but he wasn't running from trouble either. Word had spread about his karate training, and suddenly everyone wanted to know his story. Olivia, who had found her own bravery in Dustin's example, became his closest friend at school. She told him later that watching him stand up to Kyle had inspired her to speak up in class, to join the book club, to stop hiding her intelligence behind a mask of silence. "You showed me that being different isn't something to be ashamed of," she said one day as they sat together at lunch, at a table that was no longer empty. "It's something to be proud of." Kyle, meanwhile, had become a warning tale. The video of his defeat had embarrassed him in front of the whole school, and his reputation as an unstoppable force had been destroyed in less than 40 seconds. His main group of friends stayed loyal, but the fear and automatic respect he'd commanded were gone forever. Dustin saw him sometimes in the corridors, walking with his head down, probably feeling some small bit of the shame he'd caused on others. Part of Dustin felt sorry for him, understanding now that bullies were often victims themselves, acting out their own pain and insecurity on easier targets. But mostly, Dustin felt happy that justice had been served. He'd kept his promise to his uncle in spirit, if not in word, using violence only as a last choice, and only to protect himself and someone who couldn't protect themselves. And he'd used it with control and skill, never crossing the line from self-defense to attack. The event had changed more than just the situation between Dustin and Kyle. It had sent waves throughout the whole school, helping other victims to speak up and making bullies think twice before targeting someone who seemed weak. Teachers paid closer attention to social situations in their classrooms. Students were more likely to step in when they saw bullying happening. Most importantly, Dustin had learned that strength wasn't just about the ability to throw a punch or take one. Real strength was about standing up for what was right, even when it was scary. It was about protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. It was about refusing to let fear control your actions or decide your character. As Dustin walked through the corridors of Crestwood Academy now, he carried himself with the quiet assurance of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he was able to do. He wore his hand-me-down clothes with pride, ate his simple lunches without shame, and faced each day knowing that he belonged there just as much as anyone else. The scholarship kid who had once been seen as an easy target had become something much more important, a reminder that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the quietest voices make the loudest statements when they finally decide to speak.